Shabbat Shalom. So let's begin with the blessing for studying Torah. Get this in right here in the middle of the page. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. Okay, so last time we did the story of Jephthah's daughter, who was sacrificed thanks to her father making a very foolish vow. And now we're going to pick up at the end of his particular reign and hopefully get to Samson and Delilah. Really juicy stuff. Okay, would somebody, this one we're going to go through pretty quickly. Who would like to read?
I can read.
Great, thank you.
And the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together and went northward and said unto Jephthah, wherefore passedst thou over to fight against the children of Ammon, and didst not call us to go with thee? We will burn thine house upon thee with fire. And Jephthah said unto them, I and my people were at great strife with the children of Ammon, and when I called you, ye delivered me not out of their hands.
Remember, there was a request to help the Israelites, and actually in Numbers it was the Moabites who wouldn't help, but here it's the Ammonites. They did not help. So go ahead.
And when I saw that ye delivered me not, I put my life in my hands and passed over against the children of Ammon, and the Lord delivered them into my hand. Wherefore then are ye come unto me this day to fight against me? Then Jephthah gathered together all the men of Gilead and fought with Ephraim, and the men of Gilead smote Ephraim, because they said, Ye Gileadites are fugitives of Ephraim among the Ephraimites and among the Manassites. And the Gileadites took the passages of Jordan before the Ephraimites, and it was so. And when those Ephraimites which were escaped said, Let me go over, that the men of Gilead said unto them, Art thou an Ephraimite? And he said, Nay. Then said they unto him, Say now Shibboleth. And he said, Shibboleth, for he could not frame to pronounce it right. Then they took him and slew him at the passages of Jordan, and there fell at the time of the Ephraimites 40 and 2,000.
Okay, you see what they did here is the people from Ephraim obviously pronounce the word Shibboleth differently. They say Sibboleth. And so that was the way they were able to distinguish who the people were who were their enemies, right? After this, I'm going to get a different version that doesn't have thee and ye's and all that.
And Jephthah judged Israel 6 years, then died Jephthah the Gileadite, and was buried in one of the cities of Gilead. And after him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. And he had 30 sons and 30 daughters, whom he sent abroad, and took in 30 daughters from abroad for his sons, and he judged Israel 7 years. Then died Ibzan, and was buried in Bethlehem. And after him, Elon, a Zebulunite, judged Israel, and he judged Israel 10 years. And Elon the Zebulite died and was buried in Ajalon in the county of Zebulun. And after him, Abdon, the son of Hillel, a Pirathonite, judged Israel. And he had 40 sons and 30 nephews that rode on 70 ass colts, and he judged Israel 8 years. And Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, died and was buried in Pirathon in the land of Ephraim in the mount of the Amalekites.
Thank you. Sorry to give you this really tough thing to read. All right, does anything sound familiar here? This business about the Ephraimites complaining. Anybody have any memory of another instance like this? All right, back here in chapter 8, you had the men of Ephraim were complaining here to Gideon. Why didn't you ask us to fight the Midianites? And Gideon says, wait a minute, you're so much better than we are. This is Gideon in verse 2. What have I done in comparison of you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abizer? I mean, you're just so much superior to us. So Gideon uses his ability to be a diplomat, really, to calm down the Ephraimites. Whereas this guy that we just read about, Jephthah, who is a sort of rash and brash guy who is responsible for the fact that his daughter is now dead, just, fights with the Ephraimites. So just wanted you to see that difference.
Rabbi, can we assume that if they're only giving one at a time, that this is like the one chief judge of the whole land?
So what's interesting is that the way, wait, let me just, I think this is better. Okay. The way that this is written, you get the impression that each one of these judges is sort of a judge over all of Israel, but actually what they are they're judges of their own tribe. And then one or two or three or whatever tribes might get together to fight the enemy. But the judge of that particular tribe is not actually, the judge of the entire country. I think this is a better version.
So what do you think the value is in giving us only this limited lineage and history? Like, why are they picking these people who, without even telling us anything they did, except how many nephews they had?
And well, I think what they're doing here is that they are privileging the more interesting judges as opposed to the ones who just, reigned and nothing much happened. They want, obviously, the Bible give us a whole genealogy of somebody, right? So-and-so begat so-and-so begat so-and-so. Why do we care? So we know how many generations have gone by. They like to be thorough, right?
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Bible Gateway has the Common Jewish Bible. And
yeah, I have it up. Thank you. I just, for some reason, clicked on the wrong one. Thank you. Yeah, I don't like the ye's and these and thous, even though that's supposedly more intimate, but it feels really, very archaic. Before we start talking about Samson, what I want to know is, what are people's preconceptions about Samson and Delilah, which is a story that is sort of a common knowledge kind of story? What do we know about Samson and Delilah?
Well, he made his hair long because he was a sect of Judaism that was supposed to give up alcohol and women and let his hair grow forever and ever. I can't remember the name of the sect though that does that.
It's called the Nazarite.
Nazarite, that's it.
Yeah. It's actually not a sect. It's the only thing that Judaism has that comes close to being a monk or a nun or somebody. Okay, what else do we know about? Those are good things. Very good.
And isn't it for a certain period of time? Become
It's
a
supposed
Nazarite?
to only be for 7 years. Yeah, and this is
It's
different.
not like a monk forever.
Right. What else do we know?
That Samson's hair was his strength.
His strength was in his hair, right?
Yeah, and she cut it.
She cut it. Okay, and what else do we know about Delilah?
She's very sly, very wily, very seductive.
She's sly. Okay. Anything else?
She's a Philistine woman.
She's a Philistine woman. Good.
Hmm.
Anything else? Do we have a positive image of Delilah? Or a negative one? Jane is shaking her head. So negative. Why is it a negative image of Delilah?
Because I think it's because she's so seductive. She's a foreigner. She's an outsider. She's the seductive Samson. She's everything that the matriarchs aren't.
Aha. So what does that mean?
So she's a bad woman.
She's a bad woman. So what are the matriarchs?
The matriarchs are good women. They support their men, they bear children, they're arranged marriages. She doesn't seem to fit into that loop.
Uh-huh. Okay. Anything else?
She's smart.
Okay.
Well, she causes him to break his vows, right? He's supposed to be vowed as a Nazarite to not have anything to do with any woman besides a Philistine woman to boot.
Okay. We'll see about that in a second.
And she was beautiful, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. So we basically don't have a very good image of her, right? Does she trick him?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we think she tricks
But he's
him.
pretty dumb.
Suzanne knows more about the story.
Well,
I can
no,
tell by your reaction.
I guess when I read it, I just think he's really dumb.
Yes.
I don't really tend to think about it being her. Like he's
Yeah.
the one who's really, really stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what we're going to find out. So somehow the story has been passed down as she is a seductress and she tricks him and all of that. She's a bad woman. But let's see what the story actually says. So let's go on with chapter 13. Who would like to read this?
I can do it if you want.
Thank you, Sandy.
Okay, just a minute.
Can you read it? Oh,
I had to put my glasses on.
sure.
Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. A certain man of Zorah named Manoah from the clan of Danites had a wife who was childless, unable to give birth. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You are barren and childless, but you are going to be pregnant and give birth to a son. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean. You will become pregnant and have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because the boy is to be a Nazirite, dedicated to God from the womb. He will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines." Let somebody else read. My voice is going.
I'll take
Already. Oh, go
Thank you.
ahead, Jane.
Go ahead. Oh, okay. Then the woman went to her husband and told him, "A man of God came to me. He looked like an angel of God, very awesome. I didn't ask him where he came from, and he didn't tell me his name. But he said to me, 'You will become pregnant and have a son. Now then, drink no wine or other fermented drink, and do not eat anything unclean, because the boy will be a Nazirite of God from the womb until the day of his death.' Then Manoah prayed to the Lord, 'Pardon your servant, Lord. I beg you to let the man of God you sent to us come again to teach us how to bring up the boy who is to be born.' God heard Manoah, and the angel of God came again to the woman while she was out in the field, but her husband Manoah was not with her. The woman hurried to tell her husband, 'He's here, the man who appeared to me the other day.' Manoah got up and followed his wife. When he came to the man, he said, 'Are you the man who talked to my wife?' 'I am,' he said. So Manoah asked him, 'When your words are fulfilled, what is to be the rule that governs the boy's life and work?' The angel of the Lord answered, 'Your wife must do all that I have told her. She must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, nor drink any wine or other fermented drink, nor anything unclean. She must do everything I have commanded her.' Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, 'We would like you to stay until we prepare a young goat for you.' The angel of the Lord replied, 'Even though you detain me, I will not eat any of your food. But if you prepare a burnt offering, offer it to the Lord.' Manoah did not realize that it was the angel of the Lord. Then Manoah inquired of the angel of the Lord, 'What is your name, so that we may honor you when your word becomes true?' He replied, 'Why do you ask my name? It is beyond understanding.' Then Manoah took a young goat together with the grain offering and sacrificed it on a rock to the Lord. And the Lord did an amazing thing while Manoah and his wife watched. As the flame blazed up from the altar toward heaven, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame. Seeing this, Manoah and his wife fell with their faces to the ground. When the angel of the Lord did not show himself again to Manoah and his wife, Manoah realized that it was the angel of the Lord. 'We are doomed to die,' he said to his wife. 'We have seen God.' But his wife answered, if the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and grain offering from our hands, nor shown us all these things, or now told us this. The woman gave birth to a boy and named him Samson. He grew and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir while he was in Mahane Dan between Zorah and Eshtaol.
Thank you. Okay. So of course we have the same pattern here, right? The Israelites did what was evil in the eyes of God, and God therefore punished them, right? And so the Philistines ran the country for 40 years. Now we have this woman who of course is not named, which is kind of annoying. However, what do you notice about this, what's called an annunciation scene, where somebody's told by God that they're going to have a child? Sarah was also, right? Sarah was also barren. A lot of women are barren until God opens up their womb. So there is this pattern of that. And then there's a pattern of an announcement that you're going to have a child. So who
The
gets
Jesus
told?
story.
Oh, the Jesus story? Okay. They got it from us, right? Okay. But what do you notice? I'm sorry?
Isaac's story.
Yeah, I mean, all these stories have these women who are barren, including Hannah, whose stories we read at the high holidays. But what do you notice about this annunciation scene? Let's say compared to Sarah's annunciation scene.
It's direct, as opposed to Sarah, which is very indirect. It's very much like Hagar, because
Yes.
the angel of the Lord tells Hagar, this is what I've read. It says in the text, you are pregnant, but it's said in such a way, the words are arranged in such a way that the rabbis believe that she had a miscarriage when she ran away from Sarah, and
Okay.
that she will become pregnant. So this is what I call a direct enunciation as opposed to an indirect enunciation.
Okay.
But Sarah only overheard.
Well, that's the thing. Sarah overhears it, right?
Yeah.
Here, and with Hagar and with Rebecca, the angel of God is telling the woman directly, this is what's going to happen, right?
Right.
And it's not being told to the father, interestingly enough. Now, notice that it says in this first paragraph, he will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines. So in other words, he is not going to deliver the Israelites from the Philistines. He will begin to do it, okay? So in other words, they're not, apparently, according to the traditional commentary, the Israelites did not merit full salvation, complete salvation. They're only meriting a partial salvation because he's only going to begin to help them out, right? He never defeats them. He scares them, but he never defeats them. And Samson's name in Hebrew is Shimshon. And so the word Shemesh is in there. Anybody know what Shemesh means? It means sun. Yeah, sun. S-U-N, not S-O-N, right? So the sun can be beneficial and it can be harmful. So it's a little bit of an ambiguous name. So he was considered the sun and the shield of Israel, but sometimes. And Samson's not going to have the full weight of the people behind him. He's going to do what he's doing on his own on a personal basis. Apparently, again, according to the traditional commentary, because he, the Israelites don't deserve a full and complete salvation, and therefore God's not going to help them, only help Samson. Okay, so, and then Manoah, what do you think about this guy Manoah?
Well, he thinks they're going to die.
Right, he thinks they're going to die.
The angel of the Lord has spoken to them. And she seems much calmer than him.
Yeah.
I mean, she said, oh, look, if he was going to strike us dead, he wouldn't have done this. He wouldn't have accepted a burnt offering. He wouldn't have told us what to do. So relax.
Exactly.
It's not going to happen.
Exactly. So
He also,
yeah, go ahead,
sorry.
please.
He also asks for the angel to come to talk to him, because the angel first talked to her, and then he asks, come talk to us. And then the angel comes back and talks to her.
Right, exactly, exactly. It seems like this guy's not that bright, which might be a bit of a precursor to the kind of intelligence his son has or does not have. So he's not that bright, and he gets scared. He jumps to conclusions. His wife is the one who's able to say, no, that's not at all what's going on, right? And she's the one that the angel speaks to twice. And gives very specific instructions to, like, she can't drink either, right? And now a Nazirite is not allowed to drink or cut their hair. And they're only supposed to be in service to God for a certain number of years. You're not supposed to take vows of, leading an ascetic life forever. But in this case, it's different. But the angel tells the wife all the details about what is supposed to happen. Is maybe the angel doesn't trust that the father is going to be able to understand. And in any event, it's the mother who's going to carry the child. And if she drinks, that's going to get into the, system of her baby. So she can't drink either.
Rabbi Singer?
Yeah.
I was kind of surprised that in those days they knew not to drink while you're pregnant.
Well, it's only the Nazirite. They don't say generally you can't drink while you're pregnant. It's just for the Nazirite.
She couldn't drink while
she couldn't, right, because she's going to carry a child, and the alcohol will go into the baby, who is not supposed to touch liquor. It's not because of birth defects, I don't think. So don't drink any of this stuff, because otherwise he's going to come out and and have been tainted by the liquor that you drink.
Which is actually true.
It's true, although, as I said, it's only for a Nazirite. They don't say this for just a regular baby, although they should have, obviously.
Now, does he not drink forever?
He can't if he's going to be a Nazirite forever, right?
Right.
By drink, you mean liquor drink?
Yeah.
Alcohol.
Yeah, alcohol, right. Also, the other thing to notice is the fire here, because that's going to be a relevant image, that there's a sacrifice made, and then,
What is meant by unclean? Not to eat anything unclean.
Right, it has to be ritually, ritually clean, okay? Ritual cleanliness, not, and in other words, it's like going to the mikvah to be purified. And the mikvah is not necessarily the cleanest water ever, right?
Yeah.
So what Robert Alter says about the liquor, since the fetus feeds from the mother, the clear implication is that this prohibition, which began in her pregnancy, will also be obligatory for the future Nazirite. Nazirites in general refrain from alcoholic beverages. Now, she doesn't say anything about the ban on cutting the hair. Whatever. And also he notes that, let's see, does it say it in this version here? Verse 7, let me look. You'll become pregnant, have a son, now then drink no wine. This boy will be a Nazirite from the womb until the day of his death, right? So she adds the day of his death, because the messenger talks about somebody who's going to deliver Israel, right? He will take the lead in delivering Israel. And so she adds the day of his death, which is a bit of an ominous addition there. Okay.
Is this considered a prophecy on her part?
I would think so, yeah. I mean, God speaking to her, through her, right? So that is the way prophets work. Okay.
If he's supposed to be a Nazirite from the womb, that would be really unusual, right?
Yes, it would be.
I guess my question for that is, does that sort of imply that it's going to be his whole life?
Yeah.
Like, it's not a personal thing he's deciding to do for 7 years.
Right. Unfortunately, it's being decided for him, which is not ideal, right? it would be ideal if he made the decision himself. We can see, we'll see in the story that he's not necessarily up to the task, right? So, okay, any other comments or questions?
I have one. I'm a little unsure what to make of this mild obsession with the name of the man or the angel, and the way they keep going back and forth between man and angel. But it's like Manoah is really needs to know this name, and she even tells him, he didn't tell me his name, and then he's got to know his name. And I don't recall story before where angels or gave their names when they arrived. Is this a new thing?
Yeah, let's see. There's a note here from Robert Alter. For Manoah did not know. Is that verse 17? Yeah. Even at this late point in the story, he still doesn't get it. And thus he goes on to ask for the name of the mysterious stranger, so that after the birth of the child, he can find a way to pay honor to the bearer of the good tidings.
Does he think it's a person?
I think he's not sure at first. Yeah, I think that's what it is. Is that I think she knows that
he looked like an angel of God, very awesome, but he still isn't sure.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's why. I think he doesn't get it that it's an angel. He thinks it's a person that he can go thank later on. And he seems to just not get much of what's going on here. And then the angel says, "Why do you ask my name? It's beyond understanding." In other words, I'm a messenger of God, and you can't know my name.
So maybe that's the defining line is if I had a name, I would be a person. Is that kind of? Although there are angels that have names like Gabriel, and yeah. But I think the idea maybe is more, what Suzanne was suggesting is that Manoah thinks it's a regular old person. He doesn't really get it, and that's why he keeps asking for the name. And I don't know that angels come along and tell you their name. Didn't you? When Jacob, I have to find my Did Jacob also ask for his name, for the name of the, let me go find Jacob.
That's right, Jacob did. He asked for the name of the angel.
I'm going to find a place in, okay, let's see. This is Genesis. Jacob was left alone, and Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Now the man says, "What is your name?" Jacob says, and then he says, "Your name is no longer going to be Jacob."
Oh, yeah.
And then he says, "Please tell me your name."
Yeah.
Why do you ask my name? Obviously you can't. So apparently you're not allowed to ask the name of an angel.
But Moses asked God what his name is at the burning bush.
That's very true.
What should I call you?
Exactly.
And
well,
God,
you know what?
yeah.
Moses is special.
Yeah.
And consistency is not part of any of this, right? But
no, but I like that answer because it's rooted in the past. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah.
If it comes down to the absolute basic square of the Jewish idea of God, I think it is the God of these three ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
It's the rock bottom. It's the rock bottom definition.
Yeah, but then Moses gets a special name that was not given to any of the other ancestors. Yod He Vav He,
Yeah.
Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. It's not much of a name. It's more of a verb. So yeah, it's a different point in history, and also it's a direct conversation with God, not with a messenger. But as I said, I wouldn't look for consistency in any of this. Different people wrote different parts of it, and they're not trying to make it all consistent. So let's take a look at the paper I wrote about women in the book of Judges. So first, we're going to talk about Manoah's wife, which we just did. And the story of Manoah's wife represents a moment of hope for the political situation in Israel. A savior is to deliver the Israelites from the assault of the Philistines, Plishtim in Hebrew. The trope that encapsulates this promise is another woman, Manoah's wife, who is assigned a significant place in the text, at least initially. Not only is she to give birth to Israel's hero, she also plays a unique role in what Robert Alter calls a biblical type scene. So a biblical type scene is kind of like a genre, like a Western. It has certain rules, and if you do something other than what the rule dictates, then you see something new and different, and you understand that it's going against type. A biblical type scene, for example, is men finding women that they're going to marry at the well. So the first person that this happens with is Isaac, except Isaac doesn't go find his wife. It's his father's messenger, Eliezer, who goes to find him. So that tells you something about Isaac, that he's kind of a weak man, right? That he's not someone who's really in charge of his life. Jacob, on the other hand, goes to the well and falls in love with Rachel. And, he cries and he kisses her, and it's all very romantic and lovely. When Moses goes to the well, he encounters 7 sisters, doesn't seem to pay any particular attention to one over the other, goes to their father's house, and then the father says, "Why don't you take one of my daughters in marriage?" So each one of these scenes gives you a sense of who the person is. Moses, not so interested in his family, much more interested in his career. Jacob, clearly very interested in Rachel, and Isaac, a weak man. And so a scene like this, an annunciation scene, where an angel or God comes and tells a woman or a man that they're about to have a child, that's a different kind of type scene. And we know from Sarah, as we discussed, that she had to listen at the entrance of the tent to get her annunciation. But here, Manoah's wife is the central character. So Manoah's wife's story begins with an annunciation type scene that parallels others in the Bible. A barren woman is promised a child. As Lillian Klein suggests, this scene recalls that of Sarah and the birth which followed. The parallel serves to underline the difference and how these two stories are told, that is, the preeminence of Manoah's wife's position. The angel announces the birth to her, not to her husband. When Manoah asks that the angel return and speak to him, the angel comes back to her. When the angel tells the husband the news, he does not give him as much information as he had given her. As Cheryl Exum points out, attention is constantly being redirected to the woman. Manoah's position is undercut further as the text singles out Manoah's lack of perception. Exum raises the question of whether Manoah would ever have seen the messenger were it not for the woman's intervention. His wife is portrayed in contrast as a better theologian, for she recognizes the divine purpose behind the events and is therefore able to assure her husband that they will not die. Yaira Amit points out that Manoah needs to be reassured by a sensitive woman who analyzes the situation logically. This overshadowing of the father is unique to the birth narrative. Now, we know that, for example, Rebecca was told directly by God that she had twins in her womb and that the older would serve the younger. But there's no kind of competition with the father in this. She's alone in that scene. But here, clearly, Manoah is being shoved aside. And I think what we'll find out is that Manoah's wife, who is Samson's mother, is a smart woman who plays an important role here. And we'll find out that Samson's relationship to women is quite different, that the women he picks are not picked for their brains, shall we say. Okay, not only does Manoah's wife have a great deal of theological insight, she also possesses the power of prophecy. When she repeats the angel's announcement to her husband, she does not mention her sons delivering Israel from the Philistines, but she does add a time limit to his Nazirite vow. Adele Reinhardt notes what is striking is that the woman virtually takes on the prophetic role of the angel by extending the Nazirite vow to encompass her son's entire life. Because clearly the angel's message was not necessarily that this Nazirite vow would last for his whole life, But she says, not only for his whole life, but until his death. And she doesn't mention the deliverance. Explain fuel and gun, intuitively substituting death for deliverance, she becomes prophetic. Samson's eventual suicide will affect the beginning of deliverance. She reveals what she knows, that deliverance has its price. Grace Aguilar again understands this portrait of a woman as reflective of the reality in Israel at the time. That Manoah's wife could thus comprehend and thus correctly judge implies a domestic and social position which not only permitted, but exercised these peculiar faculties. However, just as the promise for Israel's stability fades with the death of Shimshon, Samson, so too Manoah's wife's presence is gradually eclipsed until we hear no more of her. And this seems to be the pattern in the book of Judges. You have women towards the beginning of the book that are strong. You have Devorah, you have Yael. You have a couple of these women that come along now, and you'll see little by little, they are totally silenced. And in this one story, the same thing happens to Manoah's wife. Samika Baal charts her journey. The power of the mother is slowly undermined in the course of the story. After the transgression of the Nazirite law by eating the honey from the lion, the mother who acted so autonomously at first and has next been coupled to the father is entirely repressed from here on. It is the father who went down to the woman to arrange the marriage. It is to his father's house that he returns. Samson's course from the power of the mother to the grave of the father. And we'll see how that develops now in the next chapter. So we're going to do a new share, and we're going to share the next chapter of the book of Judges. Now I have to mention that I stopped recording half hour into this Torah study, which means that I am recreating what we studied and what we talked about for the last hour of Torah study. So we will not have comments by all our wonderful participants. Unfortunately, I am really sorry about that because there were some really, really terrific comments. Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. A man of great appetites, as we see. So Samson sees a woman, thinks she's cute, wants her. Later on, we'll see David doing the same thing with Bathsheba. Again, a contrast to the way in which his mother is an intelligent theologian, and here we just have a pretty face. His father and mother replied, isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among all our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? Now, this conversation could happen today, right? How many parents, when their son or daughter comes to them and says, I found a partner for life, and the parents go, well, you couldn't have found someone else. You couldn't have found a Jewish person, or you couldn't have found a rich person, or you couldn't have found a doctor, whatever it is. Very similar. So parents back then, just like now, not necessarily happy with their child's choice. And of course, the Philistines are always characterized as uncircumcised because, of course, the Israelites were circumcised and other people in that area were also often circumcised. The Philistines were not, and it really distinguished them from the other peoples. But Samson said to his father, get her for me. She's the right one for me. A bit of a spoiled brat, maybe, too, huh? Okay. His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. So this is a little parenthesis. According to Robert Alter, it might be a bit of a stretch to believe that the reason Samson keeps going after Philistine women, which we'll see, is because that was a way for Samson to infiltrate the Philistine community and therefore be able to kill a bunch of them and stop them from threatening the Israelites. So we'll see if that works. Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. As they approached the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion came roaring towards them. the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. But he told neither his father nor his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with a woman, and he liked her. Okay, a lot of things going on in here. First of all, as you can see, the Spirit of the Lord comes in these sort of powerful bursts into Samson. And he's that kind of person. He's somebody who responds in a very powerful, strong, angry way in little bursts. It's not a consistent, kind of, he's not someone who's very good at, let's say, planning ahead and having the Spirit of God in him at all times. It's just like this powerful thing comes along and he reacts to it, reacts instantly, no planning ahead. Just, he's a man of appetites, obviously very strong sexual appetite. Also, we see a bunch of animals come along in here, and that I think is a parallel to the kind of person he is. Appetite and driven by very basic stuff. So this lion comes along, he rips the lion apart, and that's not really such a wonderful thing to do. And he doesn't tell his parents. That's another point at which we're going to see that he keeps certain secrets from certain people, like his parents, but he also reveals secrets to people he shouldn't be revealing them to. So he's ripped this animal apart, and sometime later, when he went back to marry this woman, he turned aside to look at the lion's carcass, and in it he saw a swarm of bees and some honey. He scooped out the honey with his hands and ate as he went along. Okay, he is violating his Nazirite vow by eating something that is not essentially kosher, but pure. You don't eat from a carcass. You don't tear an animal apart. You're not supposed to eat anything from an animal that's been torn. It's called treif. And again, he sees something that looks good. Yum, I'm going to go eat it. No thought as to whether or not he has Nazirite vows, which, by the way, of course, he was already promised to be a Nazirite by his mother. He never chose that, but nonetheless, he's under those vows. So he eats this stuff, and then he goes and rejoins his parents, and he gives them some, and they too ate it. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass. Again, a big secret. Now his father went down to see the woman, and there Samson held a feast, as was customary for young men. When the people saw him, they chose 30 men to be his companions. Let me tell you a riddle, Samson said to them. If you can give me the answer within the 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. If you can't tell me the answer, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. Now, he's sure that they will not be able to tell the answer of this riddle. So he does not expect them to be okay with this. So they say, tell us your riddle. And they said, let's hear it. He replied, out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. For 3 days, they could not give the answer. On the 4th day, they said to Samson's wife, coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death. Did you invite us here to steal our property? Then Samson's wife threw herself on him, sobbing, you hate me. You don't really love me. You've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. This is, again, the kind of argument that is often made to a spouse or a partner. If you really loved me, you wouldn't do this thing. You would do this other thing. And so she's prevailing upon him to give away the secret. I haven't explained it even to my mother and father, he replied, so why should I explain it to you? She cried the whole 7 days of the feast. So on the 7th day, he finally told her because she continued to press him. She in turn explained the riddle to her people. Before sunset on the 7th day, the men of the town said to him, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? Samson said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. So they obviously have the answer. The wife gave it to them after a lot of cajoling and crying. What does Samson think? He doesn't think, oh, maybe she got a threat against her life and against her family. No, she must have committed adultery with one of these guys. That's what plowed my heifer means. And so now he thinks she's committed adultery. And then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him once again. He went down to Ashkelon, struck down 30 of their men, stripped them of everything, and gave their clothes to those who would explain the riddle. Burning with anger, he returned to his father's home. And Samson's wife was given to one of his companions who had attended him at the feast. So Samson's wife is given to someone else because it seems like he's pretty pissed at her for having had adultery or committed adultery. So you see that his anger burns and he goes forth and does something with that anger. No thinking ahead, which we will see in a moment. Okay, next chapter. Later on, at the time of wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife. I guess that's instead of bringing a bouquet of flowers, he's bringing her a goat. Actually, that was what Judah's messenger went to find Tamar after he'd slept with her and brought a goat also. So that seems to be what young ladies like in those days. Okay, he brings her a goat and he says, I'm going to my wife's room. But her father would not let him go in. I was so sure you hated her, he said, that I gave her to your companion. Isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead. Samson said to them, this time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them. So he went out and caught 300 foxes and tied them tail to tail in pairs. He then fastened a torch to every pair of tails, lit the torches, and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned up the shocks and standing grain together with the vineyards and olive groves. Again, you're not supposed to really take down all of this stuff when you attack a people. He burns it all up using some animals. Looks pretty sadistic. And, he's so angry that he punishes all these other people. When the Philistines asked who did this, they were told, Samson, the Timnite's son-in-law, because his wife was given to his companion. So the Philistines went up and burned her and her father to death. Okay, so they're getting revenge on him by burning up the wife and the father. So in a sense, Samson is responsible for their death, because if he hadn't been so rash about his so-called revenge, this would not have happened. Samson said to them, since you've acted like this, I swear that I won't stop until I get my revenge on you. He attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them. Then he went down and stayed in a cave in the rock of Etam. The Philistines went up and camped in Judah, spreading out near Lehi. The people of Judah asked, why have you come to fight us? We have come to take Samson prisoner, they answered, to do to him as he did to us. Then 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Etam and said to Samson, don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us? He answered, I merely did to them what they did to me. They said to him, we've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines. So in other words, he's also put these other people's lives in danger by his rash revenge. So now they're going to hand him over to the Philistines. Samson said, swear to me that you won't kill me yourselves. Agreed, they answered. We will only tie you up and hand you over to them. We will not kill you. So they bound him with 2 new ropes and led him up from the rock. Now, a new rope is apparently wet tendons from an animal. Got a lot of animal imagery here. And so they're going to be even harder to rip apart. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came toward him shouting. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. Once again, the ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. See, he's really strong. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, another animal imagery here, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. So this guy is an amazing, strong warrior. One jawbone of a donkey, and it's enough that he can kill 1,000 men. Then Samson said, with a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I have killed 1,000 men. So he's a little bit proud of himself. When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone, and the place was called Ramat Lehi, which means jawbone hill. Because he was very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, you have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? Then God opened up the hollow place in Lehi, and water came out of it. When Samson drank, his strength returned and he revived. So the spring was called Ein Hakor. Ein Hakor means caller's spring, and it is still there in Lehi. Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. So Samson is a judge, clearly, although he mainly operates on his own. He doesn't lead an army the way the other judges have. He doesn't do a lot of judging. He doesn't seem to have that capacity. And it says he led Israel for 20 years. It says traditionally judged Israel, but it doesn't say judge Israel. And it doesn't say there was peace and there was, adherence to Yud-He Vav-He. It's just that he did this. So obviously this is not the kind of perfect leadership that we've had from other judges who at least kept Israel in a peaceful situation. There's a lot of fighting going on during all of Samson's reign. Okay, now we're going to continue with the story of Samson and Delilah. And I asked people in the class to tell me what their assumptions about Delilah were. And I want to show you a few things in popular culture that have been shaped by how we understand Delilah. So let's start with Delilah in art. So here she is. We'll get the story pretty soon, which is that she's giving away the secret of his hair, and the Philistines are there about to cut it, and he's on her lap, as you can see. Here she is from the movie, and she is a definite seductress here, right? That's what this image tells you. Seductress, seductress, seductress. And here she is cutting off his hair herself with a pair of very strange looking scissors. Okay. We're not going to play a scene from Cecil B. DeMille's film, but I suggest that at some point you might want to take a look at it to see how she's portrayed there. Also, in a couple of songs by the Grateful Dead and also by Tom Jones, we're going to look at some of those words. So Grateful Dead, if I had my way, I would tear this old building down. Well, Delilah was a woman. She was fine and fair. She had good looks, God knows, and coal black hair. Delilah, she gained all Samson's mind. When first he saw this woman, you know he couldn't believe his mind. Delilah, she climbed up on Samson's knee, said, tell me where your strength lies, if you please. She spoke so kind and she talked so fair. Well, Samson said, Delilah, cut off my hair. You can shave my head, clean as my hand, and my strength will become as natural as any old man. And let's look at Tom Jones's Delilah. I saw the light on the night that I passed by her window. I saw the flickering shadows of love on her blind. She was my woman. As she deceived me, I watched and went out of my mind. My, Delilah. Why, Delilah? I could see that girl was no good for me, but I was lost like a slave that no man could free. At break of day, when that man drove away, I was waiting. I crossed the street to her house and she opened the door. She stood there laughing. I felt the knife in my hand and she laughed no more. My, Delilah. Why, Delilah? So before they come to break down the door, forgive me, Delilah, I just couldn't take any more. So in this particular version, he actually kills her. But, she's laughing. She's looking down on him. He's madly in love with her. He can't help himself. So those are some of the images that we have of Samson and Delilah. Okay, now let's read the story in the Bible itself. All right, now we're on chapter 16. One day, Samson went to Gaza. That's where the Philistines were primarily living, near the water, where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. Now, that's all he did. He saw a prostitute. He slept with her. This might remind you of the story of Caleb and Joshua, going to reconnoiter in the land of Canaan to see what the situation was. And they meet a prostitute, and they don't necessarily even sleep with her. They just kind of develop a relationship with her, and she decides she's going to protect them when they come back and decide to conquer the land. Very different situation. And there's always intra-textual commentary like this, where somebody's situation is similar to somebody else's, but with a very important difference. Okay, so Samson went in to spend the night. The people of Gaza were told Samson is here. So they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the city gate. They made no move during the night, saying at dawn, we'll kill him. But Samson lay there until the middle of the night. Then he got up and took hold of the doors of the city gate, together with the 2 posts, and tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them to his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. So you see the idea of tearing down a building is already here in this part of the story. That's what was in the song. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him, so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. Now, first of all, what you see here is Delilah's not necessarily a prostitute, even though she's been portrayed as that. She's willing to take money in exchange for betraying him. Okay, that's a little crass. But at the same time, he represents an enemy, and she is a Philistine. So of course she's going to do something to help the Philistines rather than do something to help Samson, because she would be betraying her own people if she did that. So Delilah said to Samson, tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued. Very straightforward, no guile here, no seduction, no nothing. Just asking very point blank what the secret is. And he says, if anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man, which is a lie, of course. Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. With men hidden in the room, she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Now, you notice that right after she asks him and she ties him up, she calls out to the Philistines and she tells him they're about to get you. So it's very, very, very clear what is going on here. She is not tricking him. She is telling him the truth. All right, second time. So Delilah said to Samson, you have made a fool of me. You lied to me. Come now, tell me how you can be tied. He said, if anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man. So Delilah took new ropes and tied him with them. Then with men hidden in the room, she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he snapped the ropes off his arms as if they were threads. Again, very straightforward. Tell me your secret. The Philistines are about to get you. So he has no doubt about what is going on here. Third time, Delilah then said to Samson, all this time you've been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied. He replied, if you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric on the loom and tighten it with the pin, I'll become as weak as any other man. So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his head, wove them into the fabric, and tightened it with the pin. Again, she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and pulled up the pin and the loom with the fabric. All right, so we've had 3 occasions of this happening. So unless he's a complete lunkhead, which he is, why would this be a problem? He knows what she's trying to do. He could just refuse to say what the answer is, or he could leave. Fourth time, then she said to him, how can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? Same argument that was used by his wife. This is the 3rd time you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength. It already happened with his wife. It's happened 3 times with Delilah. Maybe he should be careful. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. So he told her everything. No razor has ever been used on my head, he said, because I've been a Nazarite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the Philistines, to the rulers of the Philistines. Come back once more, he has told me everything. So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Similar to Yael, right? Falling asleep on her lap, just like Sisera fell asleep on Yael's lap. And then the kiss of death. And then she called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. The Lord was in his hair. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. These are the eyes that kept wandering and seeing women that got him in trouble. Now they're gone. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in the prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Oops, they never took that into account. Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain. A kind of response to the song that Samson sang earlier about his being able to kill 1,000 people with one little jawbone. While they were in high spirits, they shouted, bring out Samson to entertain us. So they called Samson out of the prison, and he performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them. Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, sovereign Lord, remember me, please God, strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Then Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood. Bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other, Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. Then his brothers and his father's whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had led Israel 20 years. Okay, so I'd like to take a look at the paper I wrote about women in the book of Judges and see what I had to say many years ago. Okay, Delilah. Delilah represents the last hurrah for the women in Judges. As we shall see, she's the final woman of action. After her, women are completely silenced and subjugated. She's a strong woman, but as will become clear, her strength is limited. Though she has popularly been portrayed as a seductress, temptress, traitor, and harlot, upon closer reading of the text, it becomes clear that Delilah is actually none of these. Cheryl Exum writes, Delilah is not identified as a harlot, but commentators who consider her one are reading according to patriarchal ideology and convention. Because she's not identified in terms of her familial relationships to a male, she seems to have her own house, and Samson is apparently her lover, though she is not his wife. Other possibilities for understanding her position in society are rarely entertained. So you either have a father, a husband, or a son to take care of you, and if you have none of these, what else could you be but a prostitute? Which of course is not true in her case. In fact, as Mika Ball suggests, she could be considered a prototype of the socially successful independent woman. Her bargain with the chieftains then looks more like a business transaction than a low betrayal. In wartime, no blame is attached to patriotism, right? She was just doing what the rulers of her own people asked her to do. Furthermore, what has been characterized as an act of deception on her part is actually none of the kind. Mike Ball, among other critics, notes that Delilah makes not the slightest attempt to conceal her betrayal. Quite the contrary. Delilah makes it quite clear why she wants to know his secret. Shimshon, or Samson for his part, the purported hero of the tale, comes across as a sort of blockhead, all brawn, very little brain, driven almost entirely by his sexual appetite. He's irresponsible with regard to his Nazirite vows, breaking them when he eats honey from the lion's carcass and when he allows his hair to be cut. And Samson is anything but the helpless victim of Delilah's charms. Various feminist scholars have pointed to Samson's responsibility in his dealings with Delilah. It's almost as though he were asking Delilah to betray his secret. Mike Ball suggests, for example, that he wants to break ties with his mother. Well, I'm not sure I would go into that Freudian analysis myself, but I suppose one can do that. So as he struggles to create an autonomous self, he unconsciously enlists the help of another woman. Cutting his hair represents extreme vulnerability for him, and as such is a symbol of his giving himself over totally to the woman who cuts it. So it could be that he's trying to be very vulnerable to a woman other than his mother, or maybe the fact that his mother was the one who made the Nazirite vows for him. Maybe cutting the hair is a way to say, I am no longer a Nazirite. Who knows? Delilah's character is given additional power when considered in the context of the rest of Samson's life and his treatment of other women. Mary Cartledge Hayes suggests that Delilah's actions are retributive justice for what happened to Samson's wife in Timnah. In other words, her death for which Samson is responsible. There are certainly striking parallels in how the two stories are framed. Samson's wife is killed because of a riddle he poses, and for which he also provided the secret answer. Samson's death results from a riddle of sorts that Delilah poses to him. This reversal recalls the story of Yael and Sisera, where the woman becomes a despoiler instead of the man. Sexual symbolism in the text suggests a further connection between Samson and Delilah, and Yael and Sisera. As I mentioned, Delilah makes Samson sleep upon her knees. Sisera falls between Yael's legs. The Philistines suggest that Delilah entice him, and she asks Samson how he might be humbled. And Cheryl Exum points out that these two verbs are normally associated with a woman's seduction and rape. And those incomprehensible letters there are what once upon a time was Hebrew, but that font has disappeared from my computer, and so now it's just gobbledygook. But here's where the resonance ends and where we discover how limited Delilah's strength and autonomy really are. Where Yael acted on her own initiative, Delilah does not. Where Yael is lauded for her action, Delilah is quickly forgotten. Exum notes, for all their power over Samson, the Timnite, his wife, and Delilah are the pawns of men. Women are portrayed as powerful and dangerous, and yet subject to control by men. Once they've used the women to gain mastery over Samson, the Philistines do not need them anymore. So in the case of the Philistines, they kill the Timnite, and they credit their God and not Delilah for their victory over their enemy. Having served her purpose for males, Delilah is written out of the story. She's not even present among the spectators at Samson's final performance. The only motivation the text suggests for her is greed. Other possible motives, patriotism, for example, are suppressed. Mike Ball puts it succinctly, she remains the subject of this episode, but as such she is in the fabula as a whole, only the executor of a struggle between two male forces. Delilah, like Manoah's wife before her, is written out of the text by the end of the story. She's not even present at Shimshon or Samson's final confrontation and suicide. Okay, just as one final note, let's take a look at what the rabbis have to say about Delilah, which obviously had some impact on how we all view that poor lady. So according to the rabbinic account, Delilah used every possible wile to have Samson reveal to her the source of his strength. After he lied to her 3 times, she harassed him not only verbally, but also physically during intercourse with him. That's the rabbi's imagination. The rabbis learned this from the wording, she pressed him. And they find an allusion to this in Jacob's blessing to the tribe of Dan, which is Samson's tribe in Genesis. A viper by the path, orach. Because of the orach of women, the actions of a sly woman, he revealed his secret to her. In this manner, Delilah forced Samson to tell her of his Nazirite status. Okay, that's just one little snippet of how the rabbis understood Delilah. She's obviously some kind of viper. And that's the only way that Samson, of course, being such a high-minded man, would have ever revealed his secret. Okay, so that's it for Samson and Delilah. And next time we may very well finish the book of Judges. It's a very sad ending, but then we'll pick up with Samuel and things will get a little bit cheerier. So Shabbat Shalom, see you next time.